Thanks very much, and thanks, Minister. And just to confirm, I am on campus. I'm just not feeling great, so I'm not coming down to spread diseases. Thanks, Minister, for coming in. I just wanted to draw your attention to, I'm sure you're well aware of correspondence from some very eminent scientists, Barry McMullen, Andrew Jackson, Paul Price and John Sweeney, which was included in the correspondence that we dealt with at private session this morning. And it goes back to the 9th of August. Now, just simple questions for you really is, have you answered it? And if so, can we see a copy of the answer to it? And just for the here and now, could you tell us how you would deal with the concerns that these experts have expressed in the letter? And quite a lot of the concerns are around the legality of not having a target for LULUCF and for postponing that towards the end, and for the targets not being adequate and not fulfilling the legislation in a timely and effective manner. And they're concerned that these targets and the lack of targets in some areas is actually flying in the face of the legislation itself. Could you tell us how you would address that, please?
Well, first, I can say I have the highest regard for Barry McMullen, John Sweeney and Mr Jackson, and obviously read any letter that they have of concern with real attention. We will respond this week, as I said, and I hope can allay some of their concerns, perhaps not all. They may form a different view, but certainly with regard to, I think, one of their concerns that, as to whether budgets were set out for 2025, which I think maybe in the initial press release wasn't, maybe could be read in a way where that wasn't clear, but that it is clear we are allocating the first budgets to 2025, and that the allocation within each of the sectors is agreed. But that, yes, and as I said, I don't know if Deputy Smith, you can miss the opening contributions or questions and answer sessions in response to Deputy Whitmore here. The reasoning was very much a scientific one, in the sense that we received additional or new information this late spring, early summer, showing a very significant deterioration in the emissions from the land use sector projected to the end of the decade, and indeed a reassessment of what the baseline emissions from land use were back in 2018. And that primarily is related, as I understand, a reassessment of the emissions from upland peaty soils, where forestation had led to a much higher source of emissions from that land, and also the life cycle and characteristics, clear felling characteristics of our forest stock were also some of the reasons why that deterioration. And rather than allocating blind, as it were, in terms of either land use or the balancing amount in other departments, in other sectors, it was better to use the land use review which we're carrying out to assess what can be done in that, because the land use is designed to how do we optimise storage of carbon in our soils and land, and what are the implications, what is the direction we take in re-wetting of soils and in new forestation systems, grassland management and so on. So I think it's more accurate and appropriate to do that. We set out in the programme for government a recognition that that was a likely, that such is the scale of the challenge. We acknowledged we might have to do it in an evolving way as science and technology evolved in the course of this decade. So we will write back, as I said last week, I hope answering their concerns. They may take a different view, but that's their right. But I think the critical thing in my mind we need to do now is actually concentrate on the delivery where we do have clear targets, where we do have a budget for this first half of the decade. We could get into a long-term row in terms of, what is the correct approach in managing, scientific approach in managing that uncertainty of higher emissions from land use and the implications for each sector. But my focus, I think, is going to be on how do we deliver the immediate reductions we need in transport, agriculture, built environment, energy and so on. And And that, I think, is also where our political focus should be, because that's the biggest challenge. It's not easy. We're seeing when we do look to change policy or implement new measures that involve emissions reductions, we don't necessarily have an easy path. It is and often in many instances a lot of political opposition or public rather opposition to some of the measures we might seek to make. So my focus is on that. And indeed, I think the legislation and the allocation of these sectoral ceilings now give us a certain strength and ability to do that. I with officials, I put on my transport hat now, or my energy hat, I'm regularly saying if we don't step up here, we're going to be exposed, because this legislation requires us to act, and we know our sectoral emission ceilings, and they are justiciable. So the existing legislation is in place, is now intact with the sectoral emissions ceilings in place. You could spend the whole time arguing on that scientific approach or not, as some might argue, on the LULUCF and the unallocated savings. But I think our focus is on the emissions reductions we have to do, and that other issue will be worked out as we complete the land use review and reallocate as soon as we can.
That's fine. And I did hear the earlier contribution from you. I'm just looking for more clarity on it, because I think the point that's been made here by the experts is not it's not one about whether the science is developing or evolving, as you say. It's that 18 months delay in setting a target for the LULUCF actually flies in the face of it lacks consistency with the legislation, that is not effective, timely and in compliance with the legislation. I think it's quite extraordinary that we're into 2024 before we get a target for this sector. And of course, all sorts of speculation will happen in the meantime, speculation that this sector, particularly for smaller farmers, for sheep farmers and hill farmers, may be used as a sweep it under the carpet tactic for other sectors that aren't reaching their targets. So my question really was about the illegality of not complying with setting a target for this sector, not the argument you made around the science of evolution.
I agree with you on the need for urgency and action, but the legislation does state that the Minister and the wording is as soon as may be after a carbon budget take effect, finalise and submit each sectoral emission ceiling to the government for approval. So there is provision within the legislation, and also recognising that in instances we will, scientific information will evolve. That land use review isn't starting now. This is the half-time, as it were. The first half of it was engaged in building up the evidence, and both EPA and Teagasc having a key role in that. I don't think it completes, because it's an incredibly challenging review. It is charged with, as I see it, well, firstly optimising the storage of carbon and the reduction in the source of emissions from land use, but also it does have to optimise for the protection of biodiversity and restoration of natural habitats, the reduction and the restoration of pristine waters quality, the reduction in nitrogen and ammonia pollution, as well as greenhouse gas emissions, and I think the prosperous development of rural Ireland. So, it's complex because it also has to look at, it obviously has to incorporate, going on what I was saying earlier on about building on what we're already doing. It has to be based very much on the river basin management systems, because that's an existing European structure that is central to our environmental habitat protection. But it has to give us clear direction, or help give us clear direction in forestry policy, in rewetting, in rewilding, or in rewilding projects, and how we manage wilderness areas as well as farmland, and it has to manage, or I suppose, help us in the agricultural sector, not by telling any one individual farmer what to do, but in ongoing changes to our support systems and common agriculture policy and other measures to make sure that our land use, our targets are met. To give one further example, one of the measures we agreed in the sectoral emission ceilings this summer was with regard to the development of anaerobic digestion. And that, I think we have a good assessment, 5.8 terawatt hours we believe is possible. But that also is incorporated within the land use review, because you have to look at, it has to help us make sure we've the right anaerobic digestion system is in the right place. It's a massive project and has huge implications across so many different sectors that I think it will take 18 months.